F1 fans, welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with myself, Vasco, and Harry, and in this episode, are going to be presenting our hottest F1 takes, and we will discuss whether we agree with them or not. So, yeah, let's just get into it. Let's start with Vasco.
Well, my first hot take is something related to the future of F1, and this is that Audi will be a flop, and I want to present my reasons. Formula 1 is becoming more and more technical, and if you want to make a great engine and combine it with a great car that has great structure, you need to put a lot of money and a lot of effort, and if you don't have any previous experience, it will be super hard for this team to be competitive. And we are not expecting Audi to be like 5th or 6th best team, because nobody will enter the sport if they want to be middle to the bottom team. But I don't think that they have the experience and they have the base that, for example, Red Bull have, that Ferrari have, that Mercedes have. And that is why I think that there is a lot of noise surrounding Audi before they enter in 2026. But I think, at least in the first few years, that there will be flops. And as we all know, Formula 1 is not a sport that you have a lot of time to do better. And we saw that with McLaren's partnership with Honda at the beginning of the hybrid era. And that is why I think that Audi will have 1 or 2 poor seasons when they enter the sport, which will result in them not being competitive enough. And a few seasons after that, they will be so discouraged in the sport that they'll decide that they don't want to take part in it anymore. Similar to Toyota, for example. Toyota, they had a really big plan to establish themselves as one of the best teams and engine providers in Formula 1, and they ended up not being good enough. And I think the case with Audi will be similar. What do you think?
That's an interesting take for sure. I kind of see it more as the way Mercedes started. They began pretty mediocre, and at the start of their re-entry in the sport in 2010, and they didn't really have that much of a competitive car for the first 3 seasons. Afterwards, of course, with the hybrid era, they really nailed the regulations. I think that Audi have had quite a while to prepare for these regulations, and they're probably more focused than any of the teams right now in terms of the 2026 engines. I could see them being midfield cars, at least for the first couple of seasons, but I don't think that they would be discouraged by that. I think that they will consider it as a long-term project, at least over 5 years, maybe, if they don't break through. Let's say, because if they're on the pace of like Haas, they won't stay in the sport for as long as Haas have stayed in the sport, because Audi have bigger ambitions. And I don't personally see them flopping, but I definitely think it's a possibility.
But right now, in the modern era of F1, you don't have a lot of time to deal with your problems. And that is why I think they're not going to attract any of the better drivers on the grid if in the first 1, 2, or 3 seasons they're not competitive enough. And if they don't have better drivers, and if they're not as fast as they want in their development, I think that can hurt them a lot, because theory is one thing, and right now I think Audi are thinking, oh yeah, we have a lot of time to prepare, we can bring experienced driver or somebody who is really top notch, but if things don't click up in the first 1, 2, 3 seasons, I think they're going to be in a huge trouble.
I agree with what you said, and I think that Audi isn't going to be an instant success. I do not expect this to happen. They're going to need some time, even though, as David said, they're going to focus a lot. And for example, they're going to have an experienced team principal in the face of Andreas Seidel. I think that this is not going to help them enough. And the comparison to Toyota was good. I can also make the comparison to Renault, who were like a big manufacturer entering the sport. I mean the Renault in 2016. And also the BMW Sauber, even though they were an engine supplier, BMW, they had like huge expectations and they got a win, Kubica's win, but overall it was not good enough.
I think it would be embarrassing for Audi to give up in a sport that has seen so much success from Mercedes. This is their direct competition in Germany, and if they were to be embarrassed by them in this competition, I don't think they would take that lightly. So I really think that they are going to put in a lot of effort to get to the top of F1 or at least be competitive.
But if they see that their money are buried there and they don't have any real progress. And by the way, I don't want them to be a flop. Actually, I like Audi. I like the idea of Audi being in the sport, being competitive, being one of the top teams. I'm just skeptical about all the new teams with high expectations entering the sport because not everybody is Mercedes. And we have seen more times teams with big expectations flop rather than the opposite. But we can move to Harry.
Okay, my first hot take is also like a little bit to the future. And I think that neither Lando Norris nor George Russell will win a World Drivers' Championship. This may be controversial for a lot of people. As you know, I'm a Mercedes fan. I have to like George Russell. But I believe that he's not World Championship material. He has proven that, yes, he's performing at a high level, but when compared to the likes of Max Verstappen, okay, he beat Lewis Hamilton last year, but yeah, Hamilton had a bad year, but I think that overall, for example, in Lewis's prime, he wouldn't stand a chance. And George Russell has proven that he is not going to fight for world championships in the future. Now, Lando Norris is a more interesting case, as a lot of people are hyping him up. I think that this is going to be mainly because I think that he's going to stay in McLaren and they're not going to provide him with a world championship car. And also, there's going to be huge competition. For example, Max Verstappen, I think, is going to be at the top for quite a few years. Also, I expect Charles Leclerc to be more likely to win a championship than Lando Norris. And maybe someone else as well. Maybe even Oscar Piastri, who knows? And that is why I think so. What do you guys think?
I would disagree with the fact that George Russell has proven he'll never be capable of winning a World Drivers' Championship. He's very young and was one of the best prospects from like junior formulas that we have seen. Beating Lewis Hamilton in your first full season with Mercedes was very impressive, I would say. I mean, yes, the season after that, Lewis pretty much wiped the floor with him, but you can't expect George Russell to beat Lewis every season. I still think he's got time in the sport, and also he's driving for Mercedes, a team that has been extremely successful and one of only two teams to actually win the championship since 2010. So this is a huge manufacturer, and I think he's in a really good position. And after Lewis leaves, that team is his. As for Lando Norris, I would agree that if he doesn't move from McLaren, he will never win a championship because McLaren, I don't have any faith in them delivering a championship contending car. This isn't like the Vodafone McLaren days. They're long gone, and McLaren have seemingly never been able to recover since then. Even though they've been on the upwards path in recent years, I don't think that he really has a realistic shot with McLaren.
Well, I'm not entirely sure about McLaren because, yeah, in the past few years we haven't seen the best of them, but with the new regulations and new everything, actually, McLaren can nail it and can be a threat to the biggest teams right now, at least in the first few seasons. But I think I agree with Harry because in George Russell, I simply don't see that in him. And yeah, he has been an amazing driver throughout his junior career and in his days in Williams, especially in qualifying, he was super impressive and all that stuff. But I just don't see that spark in him. And I think if there is a close competition for the title between George Russell and somebody else from the top drivers, for example, let's say, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, even Lewis Hamilton, or whatever driver it is, I think that George Russell is going to crack under pressure and he won't be able to deliver that. And talking about Lando Norris, I actually think that if McLaren can give him a great machinery, actually he has a shot at the title. And if he moves to a team that is a title competitor, I think no matter who is against him, I think Lando Norris has a shot at the title. And if his bad luck stops at one point and he's given a really good car, I think Lando Norris can end up with at least one driver's title.
My argument is purely based on the fact that I believe that he's going to stay at McLaren, so that is why I said he won't. But as you said, if he moves to a top team, maybe he will have a great chance at the title. And now we move on to David's first hot take.
Okay, so my first hot take, it is that Fernando Alonso is a greater driver than Sebastian Vettel. Fernando Alonso, you might be thinking, he has 2 world championships, Vettel has 4. Like, what is the discussion here? Well, Fernando Alonso has, I feel like, maximized every car that he has driven. The Renault days, where he was the first person to end the Schumacher dominance. And I think that what kind of went wrong for him was that 2007 season, the controversy surrounding the entire team, and I guess his relationship with Lewis Hamilton really cost both of them the championship. And he was subsequently relieved from that team as they focused on Lewis, obviously, who was a new rising star. And he kind of wasted 2 years but going back to Renault in a not so competitive car. And then he moved to Ferrari, you know, one of the many people that dreamed to win a championship with Ferrari. And he was very close, especially on 2 occasions, 2010 and 2012, which he did both lose to Vettel. But Vettel had, I would say, a much better car. It's not even really debatable. I mean, even in 2012, I actually calculated it. Fernando Alonso, on average, qualified 6.45 in terms of position, which meant that he started the race 6th or 7th the entire season, and he finished only 3 points away from the championship. This was a car, especially at the beginning of the season, that was struggling to even make it into Q3. Sebastian Vettel has had a car that once he puts it on pole position, he is gone and there's nothing you can do about it. Fernando Alonso always has to fight his way through the pack. I remember the race in Valencia 2012, incredible performance. And overall, he just drives for teams that can't get the job done. He moved in 2015 to McLaren when they had McLaren-Honda partnership, and that wasted more years of his career, and he even left the sport for a couple years, went on to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans twice, and could have won IndyCar if his car didn't break down. Ever since coming back to Formula One at 40 plus years old, he is still an incredible driver and has even outperformed Lance Stroll more than Sebastian Vettel did in his time in Aston Martin, and has driven that car to even greater heights, which is something that Vettel wasn't able to do. I overall just see Sebastian Vettel having more world championships thanks to the car that he had.
Well, I can agree that Fernando Alonso, purely based on ability, is a bit better driver than Sebastian Vettel. But I can say that Fernando Alonso is being so good in his car when there is nothing on the table for him. And in the most important moments of his career, he has proven that he just cannot deliver it. And think about the season that you thought about McLaren, where he lost the title because of 1 point. And talking about 2010 and all the laps that he spent behind Vitaly Petrov, and the redemption of Sebastian Vettel in 2012 in Brazil. When Vettel had the opportunity, he grabbed it with both his hands, and that is why he has 4 World Drivers' Championships, because he's much more clutch in the moments that he needs to deliver compared to Fernando Alonso. And I don't know whether it is something psychologically based or something else. But Fernando, when he doesn't have to fight for anything, he's becoming a beast. And we can see that the last season when he was at Aston Martin, before that when he smashed every of his teammates in McLaren at the beginning of the turbo hybrid era, and before that. But when it comes to close fight against somebody else, he simply cannot deliver. And a lot of people will say, well, he was unlucky and he was that and he was that. He had that opportunity and he missed it. And that is why I think Vettel will be remembered as the better driver, because when he had the opportunity, he grabbed that opportunity with both hands. Because remember 2010, and this is probably the best example that I can give, because Sebastian Vettel was super young. Nobody expected him to win the title at the beginning of the season, and he and his team managed to secure the car to be the best, to have great strategy, and for him to drive it the best way possible in order to win the race in Abu Dhabi and to win the championship. And Fernando Alonso, what did he do? He spent so many laps behind a Renault that was not really competitive at that time. So can't we say that Fernando Alonso is not clutch enough in the moments when he needs to deliver? And that is why I think he's not a better driver, and he will not be remembered as the better driver in the history of F1.
But can't we say that Fernando Alonso wouldn't be in this situation if he didn't have a car as good as Sebastian Vettel's? In 2010, Sebastian Vettel had 10 pole positions, Fernando Alonso had 2. And I don't really think that these cars are comparable. I mean, the Red Bull was clearly the best car, and Fernando Alonso was constantly put in the spot to fight through the field, which Sebastian Vettel was not in many occasions. I mean, he did, of course, but nowhere near the amount as Fernando Alonso. And overall, just wheel-to-wheel racing, I think Alonso is better. I think if you put them in equal cars, Alonso is faster. I think he maximizes more out of the car than what Sebastian Vettel does, and I think he is less mistake prone than Vettel.
Well, I think Vettel is the type of driver that when it comes to super important situation, he'll push as hard as possible. And talking about, I told you that when we compare their pure talent, Fernando Alonso is higher than Sebastian Vettel. But when it comes to the situations when he needed to deliver, just remember who was higher in the standings before the weekend of Abu Dhabi 2010. And Fernando Alonso was much more experienced, and the Ferrari was not that bad at the end of the season. He came like with a few points in front of Sebastian Vettel, and he lost the title not because of the car, but because of himself. And that will put a big shadow on his career.
But don't you think it's impressive in itself with that car? And what about 2012, where the gap was even bigger between the Red Bull and the Ferrari? The Ferrari was extremely poor in 2012. To even be in the fight for the championship at the very last race with an inferior car, I think speaks volumes. It's like having a McLaren be in the driver's fight right now for the title against the Red Bull.
Well, but history will always remember only one thing, and this is the winners. And at the end of the day, not a lot of people would care like who had the faster car, but all the people will remember who won that title. And that is what separates them here. I cannot say that Vettel, talking about ability and talent during this season, was better than Fernando Alonso. But I can say that when he needed to deliver, he did it. And we all remember what happened in Brazil in 2012. We all remembered what happened in Abu Dhabi in 2010. And nobody can take that away from Vettel. And Fernando will always be remembered as the guy who only won 2 World Drivers' Championships. And this will be because he cracked under pressure in the most important moments, 2010, 2012. Harry, can you say something about that?
I agree more with what you said, and I think that, as you said, history will remember the winners. And Alonso, he may have been better in terms of ability, but his career choices just meant that he was not in the right car at the right moment. And if he had made the right choices, he would have been up there, he would have had more championships, and that is what I think.
I just want to say that my whole argument was not about who will be remembered. It's just that who is the pure better driver, and I think that was Fernando Alonso.
I think that was a great discussion, and we have a lot of hot takes left. So guys, stay tuned for part number 2, where we'll discuss a lot of other interesting things. Thank you for this discussion, boys, of course. And I think we can say that this is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us and AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
If you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.